welcome to Pod for the People, a new podcast put out by the Drew Glover for City Council campaign that offers a window into Santa Cruz politics, things that are happening around the state that affect us locally, and the realities of life in Santa Cruz. This podcast will come out weekly and alternate between analysis of what's happening at that week's City Council meeting and interviews with local leaders and special guests from around Santa Cruz. Educators, agitators, political leaders, artists, musicians, advocates, activists, and community members with some inspirational speeches and local music mixed in there too. We also want to let you know that this podcast is created with the help of the 365 Producer Program. 365 Producer is an artist training program located right here in Santa Cruz. 365 Producers students learn all the skills you'd need to create podcasts just like this, as well as music, video, photography, and artist development. Check them out at 365producer.com. I'm your host, Drew Glover, born and raised here in Santa Cruz and candidate for the Santa Cruz City Council election this November, joined by our campaign press coordinator, Madison Ross. Hi, Madison.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Drew.
It's a beautiful day to be in Santa Cruz, that's for sure. Today on the show, we're going to introduce you to the strategies of our campaign, talk about things that are happening in the last city council meeting before they went on break, the Chinatown dedication of the San Lorenzo Park Pedestrian Bridge, the sugary drink tax, the anti-rent control movement, and our trip to the and our trip to the California State Democratic Party Convention and the Unbought Unbossed 2 launch party put on by the one and only Kimberly Ellis.
I think for me and anybody in Santa Cruz who might be listening, it's probably a good idea to let them know what exactly you do in Santa Cruz and just in general, whether it be campaign or just you're a longtime activist in Santa Cruz. So maybe give us a rundown of what exactly you're involved with.
Totally. Thanks for asking. So some of you may know already, but I am the director and founder of Project Pollinate. It's a local nonprofit organization here in Santa Cruz focused on environmental sustainability and community building. I started that organization back in 2014, and we've established a mission statement of building community through pollinator preservation. We do a variety of work from installing organic beehives around the community. We have 3 active working hives at the Homeless Garden Project, one of our community partners. We also do K-12 education, where we have a partnership with the Girl Scouts of California Central Coast that encourages education and awareness around pollinators and pesticide use. And we also do advocacy in the city, where we were recently successful in getting the city to stop using glyphosate, also known as Roundup, in their landscaping procedures, which was a pretty great victory. Now we're coming back again.
For people who don't know, can you explain a little bit about what glyphosate is?
Yeah. So glyphosate is the main compound or ingredient in Roundup that does the killing of the weeds. The problem with it, though, is that it's a toxin not only to our environment, but also to humans. It destroys habitats and pollinator plants that are meant to help bees and other pollinators exist, but also has been shown to create side effects in humans, especially around developing humans, which is a concern that we're addressing in the Santa Cruz City School District because they still use glyphosate in some of their landscaping practices. Other things I do in Santa Cruz, I'm the president of the United Nations Association of Santa Cruz County. We focus on human rights, advocacy, and educating the community about the work that the UN does in general. I'm also a staff member at the Resource Center for Nonviolence, where I lead nonviolence trainings from the perspective of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I also run the after-school program where we work in schools, specifically high schools in the Santa Cruz area, teaching young Santa Cruz residents about nonviolence and the way that they can take a stand, not only in their own lives, but at their school. We also coordinate the Cultural Exchange Program at the Resource Center for Nonviolence, which brings people from Santa Cruz out to Selma, Alabama to get a real taste of what it's like in the Deep South and also broaden their views not only on the different cultures that exist around the United States, but also dive deep into the civil rights history so that we can understand where everything's coming from. I also do intern coordination there. So if anyone's listening and interested in intern stuff, that's always a really fun thing to do. I sit as a commissioner on the Santa Cruz City Commission for the Prevention of Violence Against Women, which is something that I'm honored to do. I was appointed by one of our amazing council members to provide a perspective from a male's viewpoint of ways that we can help to eliminate discrimination and violence against women here locally in Santa Cruz and ideally around the world. Right now, I'm actually working alongside the chair, Brooke Newman, of that commission to craft policy that would adopt the principles of the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which would address gender pay inequality as well as violence against women and the speed at which those kinds of sexual assault and domestic violence cases are addressed by our local police and officials. One more thing, I'm the co-chair of the Santa Cruz Poor People's Campaign. For those of you that don't know, the Poor People's Campaign is a national movement drawing attention to the issues of the poor in our country, trying to bridge people together across religious, partisan, and racial lines to address the issues of income inequality and just wealth inequality in general, both in our community, our county, and our nation. Another wonderful thing to get involved with. But on top of all of that different work in the community, I'm also a student. I go to Cabrillo College currently and study sociology, but I have my education plan set so that I'll be transferring to UCSC in the fall of 2019 to complete my studies and then eventually go on to become a teacher here locally, ideally in high schools, which is really great. There's a severe lack of African-American male teachers here in Santa Cruz. So to be able to offer that positive male role model to young students, especially students of color, since I am mixed race myself. I'm also an elected, the list goes on.
Yeah, you said one more thing at the end there, but I didn't believe it.
I'm also an elected delegate to the California State Democratic Party, which is of the 29th Assembly District. For those of you that don't know, the 29th Assembly District runs from essentially Boulder Creek down to Monterey, so representing all of the people there. I'm one of 14 delegates that go to Democratic State Party conventions and go and endorse and talk and learn about what's happening, not only in the State Democratic Party, but also in just the world, so that we can figure out how we can make that positive change.
Awesome. Thanks for that little rundown.
Little rundown, yeah.
Little quick rundown.
I didn't realize how long it was going to be when I started. But so as you can kind of get a feel, I do a lot of different things in Santa Cruz. I'm focused on a lot of different issues that I know are near and dear to a lot of our hearts and carry our kind of messages of values and principles of equity and environmental sustainability and justice. And it's been an honor to be able to do that work here. And being someone that was born and raised here, I have this sense of connection to the community that I want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can, not only to grow responsibly as a city, but also to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind or having policy decisions that make it so that people can't stay here, which is always unfortunate. But with this podcast, we want to let people know about what's going on with the campaign. For those of you that have not been following the campaign, we're going to play 2 video clips describing the basis of our campaign. We're taking a radical approach to campaign politics in Santa Cruz. And then afterwards, we're going to kind of go into some detail about the campaign, the strategy, what we're doing, and how it's working so far, and where you can plug in. So here's this.
They say to win a campaign, you need to spend a lot of your time making phone calls, raising money and scrambling to get as much as you can so you can turn around and spend that money on printing flyers, posters, banners, stickers, buttons, mailers, fundraising letters, and a whole lot of postage. We think that there's a better way. But the real question is why? Why is this the gold standard for campaigns? The simple answer is because it works. Politicians can buy our attention. They can buy their way into our news feeds, and they can buy their way into our communities. That's why I want to earn your attention. I want to do things so awesome that you feel inspired to share them in your news feeds and talk about it with your friends. Probably wondering what that looks like. To start with, the campaign has stopped accepting money.
No! No, 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 no!
No! God, please, no!
You can't be serious! You cannot be serious!
Whoa. Before you freak out, think about it this way. Instead of you giving me money to get my name and message out there, as I work every day in the community to solve issues that impact all of us, what I want from you is your help to spread the message. So not only do I want your vote, but just as importantly, I want your voice. In order for this to work, we need community engagement on a whole new level. One of the best parts about this is that it allows us to be as environmentally sustainable and conscious as possible, without having to print things like posters, flyers, banners, or any of those other kinds of marketing materials, we're able to get as close to zero waste as possible while still getting our message out there and doing things that are important to you and the rest of the community. Now let's talk about what we're gonna do once we win. There are three primary pillars to the campaign that include access to affordable housing, sustainability in development and transportation, and also this idea of inclusive representation, where we make sure we bring as many voices to the table as possible and to take all of the community into consideration while we craft our policies. Help us to revolutionize the political system in Santa Cruz and prove once and for all that the power of the people can overcome the power of money. My name is Drew Glover, and I'm running for a seat on the Santa Cruz City Council.
Awesome.
Fun fact, that was actually the first video or anything I'd ever seen of you before I even really knew about the campaign, so it worked.
It worked, yes, and I can't tell you how amazing it has been to have you on board with the campaign, Madison. It's amazing the impact that even one extra motivated, dedicated person can have. So, yeah, that's the general framework, right? We're trying to make it so that we're reducing the impact of money in politics and focusing more on the values and principles of politicians so that we can make sure that the people that we put into elected office actually represent what we want to see in the community. We want to look at the work that they do, what they've done, and the issues that they've stood up for, and ask ourselves, does this person represent what I believe in? We found that this approach has inspired tons of individuals to get engaged. We have not spent a dime, a cent on promoting this video online, and it has already been seen 8,000 times with over 200 shares. That alone says that there is this desire for change, but even more so when we go and we walk and talk to people at their doors, when we explain what we're doing at community events, there's this general energy and excitement around it, this belief in that it's possible and that there is this severe desire for change.
But I think what comes with that is a healthy amount of skepticism as well. Like the people that I've talked about, just what I do and the strategy of our campaign, they say things like, oh, well, don't you want to win? You're not printing flyers. What do you say to people who have those sorts of questions?
There are people that, like you mentioned, are skeptical. They are used to the traditional model of things, sending out tens of thousands of pieces of paper into people's mailboxes, where the majority of people that we talk to about those mailers say they just take them and put them in the trash, right? Or the recycle ideally is where it's going to go. The way that we're going to be able to win this campaign without having to print all those materials is for people to come out and get involved. Now, I understand there's people that can't walk neighborhoods because of ability levels or time or whatever it is that may limit them from being able to participate in that realm. But there are so many other ways that people can support this movement of what we're trying to achieve in Santa Cruz by talking about things with their friends. And another, one of the things that people were concerned about also were yard signs, because we're not buying new yard signs to put out into the community. That's a lot of hard plastic. And even after calling and talking to people at our local recycling center, they're skeptical as to whether or not it's even possible to recycle the signs. They just they told me they put them in the rigid plastic thing and cross their fingers, right?
And how many signs do you think one person who's running for even something local, how many signs do you think that they produce and then have no use for afterwards?
From my experience in Santa Cruz politics, most politicians buy between 200 and 500 signs to go around the community. So there's 9 candidates that are running right now, which equals thousands of signs that people are going to be buying, and then where are they going to go at the end? So we came up with a pretty creative plan to repurpose yard signs. I'm going to play this next video really quick. It goes a little bit more into the message, and then we'll kind of unpack that a little bit more when we get back. But check this out.
We recently announced a strategy on how we can minimize the carbon footprint of our campaign. The first question we get asked is, what about yard signs? Sometimes really complicated problems have really simple solutions. Each year, candidates buy hundreds of new yard signs for their campaigns just to throw them away at the end. Our plan is to take those old yard signs and repurpose them. Instead of handing a piece of paper to every person I meet, which turns out to be tens of thousands of flyers and posters, I'll just have them take out their phone and take a picture of this. So these next 2 things are the most important. First, we want to knock on every door in Santa Cruz and leave a human footprint, not a carbon footprint. But the most effective way for us to get into office without destroying the environment is for you to share this video and have conversations with your friends about why you support the movement and why you believe in what we're trying to accomplish. I was born in Santa Cruz, I was raised in Santa Cruz, and I love this city. I want to do everything I can to not only protect our environment, but make sure that we can move into a progressive future together. My name's Drew Glover, and I'm running for a seat on the Santa Cruz City Council.
Woo!
I just want to say that I think that somebody who's running for this position because it's a massive amount of work. So people that don't know, Drew's in his backyard multiple times a week, painting yard signs and figuring out the stencils, and then with the help of volunteers. I think it just shows a lot of intention and how genuine Drew is and the campaign is on being as environmentally sustainable as possible. It comes with a lot of hard work, but just showing that our campaign is willing to do this, I think really says a lot.
The idea, and with those yard signs, is that not only are we able to repaint them and repurpose them, we've done so in a way that is not only less toxic than some of the alternatives, but also has reduced the cost because we absorbed about 200 yard signs from a previous candidate that ran in the primary elections in June. And so we absorbed their signs to be able to kind of beta test and come up with some ideas of how we might be able to make this work. And after some, testing and trial and error, we came down with a pretty great solution with roll-on paint and stencils. And we took actually a beta test result to some local community events and showed people, and they absolutely loved it. They were like, wow, I can't believe that you were able to do this. This is amazing. And at the end of the day, once we finish painting all 200 signs and get them out into the community, it will have cost about a third of what it would have cost to print new yard signs, and that is reducing the amount of hard plastic that we're putting into the community. So it's these kinds of ideas, innovative solutions, focusing on what can be, not what has been done, that is going to drive our campaign to victory in November, especially with the amount of support that we've gotten from community members in general, business leaders, people that are educators, all coming out speaking in support of the campaign, the strategy, and the intention of changing the structure. I like to say revolutionizing politics in Santa Cruz, right? Because the revolution continues at home. The other thing with that is the involvement. The most important thing that someone can do to help us win is to have intentional conversations with their friends. We've done surveys in the community about how people make their decisions on voting. They do their own research and they ask their friends. So the ultimate goal is for whoever is listening right now to make a point today to go out and talk to someone about the campaign, about what we're doing, about what we're trying to achieve, and what we will achieve this November. And it's that idea that we all have an intrinsic value in the community. And that's the overarching idea that...
Yeah, and it's hardly even an idea. It's just a fact. Everybody has value, and every single voice definitely plays a role in the community at any level. Totally.
Unfortunately, not everyone subscribes to that process of thought. And so we want to be able to get that ideology into the elected realm of policymaking so that we can make it happen. Inspiration of all of this, of course, from my research, study, and training in Kingian ideology. Dr. Martin Luther King is one of my biggest heroes. He spoke truth to power. He stood up against things that he knew were unjust, and he did it while risking his own not only life, because that's what got him killed, was speaking up against the power structure, but also this audacity to challenge the way things are and put forward ideas of ways they can be. And a lot of times, especially when he came out to speak out against the Vietnam War and started the Poor People's Campaign, which is where it's rooted in, which another reason why I'm so honored to be a co-chair working on it here locally, is bringing people together. With that idea of intrinsic value, though, it's important that we all understand the role that we play and how we can best succeed at life. So I have this amazing clip. It's one of my favorite inspirational clips from Dr. King talking about the blueprint for life. So check this out.
This is the most important and crucial period of your lives, for what you do now and what you decide now at this age may well determine which way your life shall go. And the question is whether you have a proper, a solid, and a sound blueprint. And I want to suggest some of the things that should be in your life's blueprint. Number one in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your own worth, and your own somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to make you feel that you are nobody. Always feel that you count. Always feel that you have worth. And always feel that your life has ultimate significance. Secondly, in your life's blueprint, you must have, as a basic principle, the determination to achieve excellence in your various fields of endeavor. You're going to be deciding as the days and the years unfold what you will do in life, what your life's work will be. Once you discover what it will be, set out to do it, and to do it well. Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be the sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or you fail. Be the best of whatever you are. Finally, in your life's blueprint must be a commitment to the eternal principles of beauty, love, and justice. Well, life for none of us has been a crystal staff, but we must keep moving. We must keep going. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving.
So, whoops. So I get chills every time I hear that. It's the message that I transmit to the youth that I work with in the after-school
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I
programs.
felt right away. I immediately felt as if I not only had value, but was entirely capable of something that I had never done before.
And that's the key, especially in that part where if you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. And that is what we're trying to communicate to people across the city and across the county, but especially in Santa Cruz City, is that people are desperate for change. When we walk neighborhoods and talk to people and engage in conversation, people want change. It doesn't matter whether you're red or blue or conservative or moderate, progressive. When we talk to people at the door, we hear the same thing from everyone. Everyone's concerned about the same issues. The key is figuring out ways to come together across our different belief structures and find solutions that work, that are not only fiscally responsible, but also represent the vibe and what we're trying to accomplish as a community. You know, in the video that I played, we talked about wanting to knock on every door in Santa Cruz, not only just to reduce our carbon footprint, right, and leave a human one, but also because we don't want to knock on doors based off of people's political affiliation. That cuts out half of the community that wants to be represented by our local government. When I'm elected on the city council, that will be the people that I represent. And so we need to figure out a way to, instead of marginalizing, polarizing, or segregating ourselves because of our different ideologies, coming together, even if it's tough, even if it's uncomfortable, and having real conversations about values, principles, and the concept of what is right and what is wrong, right? We're not talking about what's right and left. We're talking about what's right and wrong. And that, I think, a lot of people can get behind, no matter where you land on the ideological spectrum, right? It's like,
Absolutely.
hey, we gotta put together and get it involved. Dr. King especially, you know, that was just a 2-minute clip of one of his speeches. So if you have not had a chance to go and listen to Dr. King speak, even though that one was imbued with that really inspirational music, and you can find those sprinkled throughout the internet as well, listen to some of his full-length speeches. Maybe, you know, in one of the future ones, we'll feature a speech by Dr. King and then have a guest to analyze it with us. But it is just knowledge that I think is essential for everyone to understand.
Yeah, and it speaks to everybody. You don't have to be have to have a specific ideology or be of a specific ethnicity or any type of affiliation. Like just the message behind it is talking about intrinsic value, and that goes for, like you said, everybody in the community.
And trying to and being the best at what you choose to do. You know, it's like this. It's a problem with the kind of the culture that we live in right now is that a lot of people aren't inspired by the stuff that they do because they're just doing it to get by, right? And so in that sense, it takes a lot of the ownership out of the work or the pride out of the work. That's why I chose. And the work I do, that laundry list of things that I put out in the beginning of the show, I make about $1,500 a month in doing all of that different work. Now, that's because I'm not in it for the money, right? It's because I am in those different positions because they are things that call to me at my core of like, hey, these issues need your support and your energy to push forward. And what you got to do whatever you can do to make it happen. When I started this venture of community organizing about 7 years ago, the agreement I made with myself was I don't care if I am poor as long as I'm doing something that's good for the community. And as soon as I made that agreement with myself, I felt a shift in
like
my
a weight off of your shoulders as well, not so much worried about the outcome financially, but more of the outcome of what you can get done as far as activism and bettering the community and just the world around you.
Right. And with that, not only getting that weight off of my shoulders, but also the reactions and interactions I had with people changed, right? Where instead of it was being about how am I going to get my money, how am I going to get my rent, how am I going to focus on where I'm going to, all this other kind of stuff, it was how am I going to help others? And then as soon as that mentality shifted, there were other people in the world that had that mentality and they saw that mentality and then they stepped up in times of need when I needed support in different aspects of my life to offer that support because we're all a part of a community trying to better the commonwealth, right? Trying to increase the common good for everyone. So really just life-changing. And I know that people in their different areas of life, I'm a single guy with no, real family responsibilities. I have no parents to take care of. So there's definitely a level of privilege in my ability to make that decision. So I'm not trying to say that decision's for everyone. But there are ways that we can make those decisions in our lives, no matter where we are, to focus on the betterment of the world for everybody else and really putting our full into making that happen. So with that first part of our program, just kind of talking about the strategy and background of the campaign, a little bit about me and what we're trying to communicate and accomplish here in Santa Cruz. I want to take a quick break as we transition into the next session where we're going to be talking about what happened at the last city council meeting before they took their break in June. But first, I want to play this music by a local artist. His name is Lyrical I, aka Isaac Collins, an amazing young man who's dedicated the last 10 years of his life to working in Santa Cruz with that idea of using his musical talent to bring a positive message to the movements that he's involved in and also working to help others. This guy comes to the Resource Center for Nonviolence and does mailing volunteer actions with us. I mean, stuffing envelopes, which is not the most glamorous work, but he comes every time, sits down and rocks out hundreds, if not thousands of letters with us because he understands the importance of the work that we do and his dedication to the community. He's going to be a guest on a show that we'll be having in the next couple of weeks, but being able to talk about his experience as a Black musician here in Santa Cruz, working in the community, and some of the experiences that he's had. So without further ado, this is a song by Lyrical I called Whatever You Want in Life. Please enjoy it.
What you want in life, you're gonna have to sacrifice to get it now, to get it now. What you want in life, you're gonna have to sacrifice.
Don't trip over the ball when I'm dropping the most ominous, most honest, unstoppable phenomenon. Chopping ball exhibit one you got can pull your socks up. About to got your marbles still popping out these sockets. You ain't got no more conversation left in your pockets. Got you watching your shit like you was hopscotch. And don't give me no hyped up hip hop and politics. I'm crossing my topics. I'm toxic, so toxic. My chronic, you wanting to express your start gossiping, wanting constantly. Got to be commenting, going on and on by how you so close to the dang audience. But I just ain't following. There ain't no sympathy left in the argument. You must climb out of that bottomless pit. Every left I grow, still dominant, but not really fist. Just a bitch slap of realization to knock your deja vu receptor unconscious. Warehouse steaming, microphones heavy as a rock. I'm still rocking it. I'm still rocking it.
what you want in life. You gotta have the sacrifice to get it now, to get it now. What you want in life, you gotta have the sacrifice to get it now. I sacrificed everything to even make a change in my environment when it was all like hip-hop. The business didn't even the work and the right. That's the reason why I didn't get those shows at night. So I was out there on the streets freestyling many verses, sleeping in my car just trying to even find myself, trying to understand. I find the positive in life. This hip-hop saved me at the early age when I was doing time, and I'm feeling my rhymes and even just emotions. Everything was coming around me, she wasn't there. The wonder if she even had cheated on me. And then I went back to her, then she saved me. The early age, I turned a page and I let it even just to even go. That's the reason why my flow sends me in a place. And what I'm fighting for is the sacrifice to lose everything in life. I'm trying to just get it right. What you want in life, you gotta have the sacrifice to get it now, to get it now. What you want in life, you gotta have the sacrifice to get it now.
Deep bop ba doop bop ba.
I was about to ask you want to start scatting.
Skeepadapa. Welcome back to Pod for the People, your podcast about Santa Cruz politics, things we think you should know about, and the Drew Glover for City Council campaign. We spent the first part of the show talking about the campaign, the strategy, intrinsic value, hearing speeches from Dr. Martin Luther King. Also, video clips from the campaign, conversation, and a list of all the things I do. As we get back into it, we're going to be talking about the last city council meeting. Hey, and what happened there? Because
This part is super valuable for people in Santa Cruz who really care about local politics but need more outlets to be really knowledgeable about what's going on in Santa Cruz.
absolutely, because if you go to the city's website and go to try to find the information in their summaries, it's there, but then you got to click on a bunch of other things to get all the info that correlates to their decision. So we'll be doing updates on, like I'd mentioned, all the things that are hyper relevant and or interesting that we can pull out, and when we have time, we'll also be dedicating entire shows at some point to the analysis of what's been going on in city council. So that'll be great for people to tune in. We'll have done all the background research for you on the topic, so you can check that out. And you're always welcome, because when we post these, we'll ideally include links to all of the content that we're talking about, so you can do your own research and double check on everything that we're talking about. So the city council went on their summer break after this last meeting, which took place on June 26th. Of course, they covered a lot of stuff since it was their last one to have before they were gone for about a month. So I'll just run through some of the things that were covered, but then I'll also go into two specific ones: the dedication of the San Lorenzo River Pedestrian Bridge as the Chinatown Bridge, and the exploration into that. And
San Lorenzo Park Pedestrian Bridge?
the San Lorenzo Park / River Pedestrian Bridge. I think they call it the River Pedestrian Bridge in the notes. Yeah, naming the pedestrian bridge at San Lorenzo Park. That's what they call it. But naming that the Chinatown Bridge, and then Also, we'll be looking at the sugary drink tax. So for those of you that don't know, the city has been milling around with this idea of a sugary drink tax, which we'll talk about. Other things that happened at the city council meeting that you may want to know about: the lease for the Beach Flats Community Garden. For those of you that don't know, a couple of years ago, there was a threat to the Beach Flats Community Garden, a small parcel of land in the Beach Flats neighborhood that used to be a derelict lot, but was transformed over the last 20 years by local residents into a thriving community garden space that uses indigenous farming practices from Central and South America to create and produce amazing organic vegetables that goes to support the Beach Flats neighborhood, which of course is predominantly a Latinx community. So incredibly valuable as a community resource in general. And it was under threat by the Seaside Company that was saying they were not going to renew the lease a couple of years ago. After amazing outreach, advocacy, and activism from local people, residents, and farmers at the garden, they were able to secure a new lease for 2 years that was up for renewal this year. The stipulation, though, in that lease was that they lost 1/3 of the garden in that new negotiation. So they came in and they bulldozed a large portion of the garden. There's a lot of critique that they came in and bulldozed more than they were supposed to, killing mature Nepalis and tearing them out of the ground, as well as removing some trees. So there was concern that when this lease agreement came back up again, they would try to do that same kind of thing, right? And take more and more away. Luckily, it looks, though, that the motion carried to accept an amendment to the lease agreement between the Seaside Company and the city, extending the lease for the Beach Flats Community Garden to December 31st, 2021. So we have some more time. A promising thing in that decision, though, was that they are going to encourage the city staff to continue serious, and the word is they're serious, ongoing discussions with the Seaside Company about a long-term future for the Beach Flats Garden, and then report back to the council within 6 months. So this is a great opportunity for anyone that wants to support local organic gardening in traditionally underserved communities to write to not only your city council members, but also to the Seaside Company, also known as the owners of the boardwalk, to save that property and make it a community resource that will go on for generations. Other things that they did were talking about designating council member Matthews as the voting delegate to attend the League of California Cities annual conference in Long Beach, California.
That's Cynthia Matthews, right?
Cynthia Matthews, yep, absolutely. A long-time member of the city council. I think if you add them all up, she's on her 20th year as a city council member, which is really interesting if you look at the history of the city. Without saying any more about that, we can move on to the consent agenda, which focused on one of those things like I had mentioned about naming the pedestrian bridge at San Lorenzo Park and installation of a memorial marker or public art display. And with that, the motion carried to direct the Parks and Rec Commission to consider the naming of the San Lorenzo pedestrian bridge the Chinatown Bridge, and to explore with the involvement of the Historic Preservation Commission the installation of a memorial marker, interpretive signage, or public art to educate the community about the story of the Chinese residents who helped build the Santa Cruz community and make recommendations to the city council for actions on both sides. Did you know that there was a Chinese population here?
I did not. This is the first time I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's a pretty unknown by a lot of people, even people that have lived in Santa Cruz for a long time. Really interesting. I was doing some research on it just to get an idea of the history of Chinese here in Santa Cruz and, you know, what that history looked like. Some of the research I came up with came back talking about Chinese-built railroads, right? Because we all know that Chinese came to California and emigrated here to build the railroads under terrible working conditions, a lot of oppression, a lot of degrading situations, death, dangerous, you know, just and underappreciated as usual with immigrants in our country as they come to help build the infrastructure of what we're trying to do. Ironically, though, with the new Chinese-built railroads, it brought a burst of new economy into Santa Cruz, which was great, but it increased the rents on Pacific Avenue, where the Chinatown properties were originally, which caused the Chinese businesses to have to look for new homes, which a lot of them found on Front Street, which was the what was considered potentially the red light district, right, of Santa Cruz. There was an incredibly small population of Chinese people here in Santa Cruz, but I think they note it at 98 Chinese people lived in Santa Cruz during the 1880 census, but that's in comparison to there being only a total of 4,000 people in Santa Cruz in general because it was so long ago. Really interesting, though, hearing they come in, they help build the infrastructure, the economy starts to boom and becomes good, and the people that help to build the infrastructure of the community are being pushed farther and farther out.
So not only during the work were they incredibly underappreciated and oppressed, but then afterwards that same treatment continued.
Right, exactly.
Which
and
is
then
not a new thing.
Right, especially with the appreciation of the work that immigrants do in the United States in general. Santa Cruz is not immune to that kind of
Absolutely not.
I'm going to say it, racism and bigotry, right? Because those are seriously important. And in 1870, we start to see a lot of national anti-Chinese laws to stop immigration. And with that became, of course, a lot more difficult to exist as an immigrant here in Santa Cruz in general. Even though there were a lot of Chinese families that weren't able to stay in Santa Cruz, there were a few families that were able to stay and become established, played a lot of key roles in the development of not only the city, but also helping to preserve historical sites and advocate for people of color, which is really wonderful. But even in a KION interview, Greg Pepping of the Coastal Watershed Council was quoted in saying, "Chinese Americans played a key role in the history of Santa Cruz. They were persecuted, they weren't welcomed a lot of times, and yet they played a key role. So it's important we remember our history and pay tribute to a number of people who played an important role in Santa Cruz." I think that's incredibly important, right? And I think having this acknowledgement to Santa Cruz's past is essential
To moving forward.
but especially if we're doing it, and only if we're doing it in a way that acknowledges the true history of what's going on. You know, for a long time, there's been a lot of people that have requested a plaque be put on the Water Street Bridge because that's where 2 Mexican Americans were hung. A lot of people don't know that.
I didn't know that.
And so it's really important that we start drawing attention to these kinds of things because while I love Santa Cruz and I was born and raised here, there's a lot of misconception as to the history, as to, you know, the level of progressiveness of our community, and wanting to make sure that those are acknowledged and brought to the forefront.
Well, that's a part of believing in something wholeheartedly, is that you want to have constructive criticism and make sure it's going in the right direction.
And along with that kind of stuff, and we'll do a whole nother show on this, London Nelson, historical figure here in Santa Cruz, somehow through the 150 years since he was generous enough to donate his property and money to help the school systems of Santa Cruz, somehow it's been changed to Loudon Nelson over time. You know, the Loudon Nelson Community Center, his name was London Nelson, and that's attributed to a clerical error sometime back in the 1800s. But they haven't changed it.
Just never got fixed.
And there's plaques all around that say Loudon Nelson. It seems rather disrespectful to the memory. But we'll talk about that and a lot more in another segment. Just really briefly, other things that were covered at the city council meeting, the resolution number NS-294212 was adopted to urge the Trump administration, the Department of Justice, and Congress to keep families together. Also directed the mayor to draft a letter expressing this position to the federal and state representatives, and direct the mayor to write a letter to ask Governor Brown to withdraw all California National Guard troops from the southern border with Mexico. So that is pretty fantastic, right?
And incredibly important in taking care of our immigrant community members.
Thank you, Santa Cruz City Council. There was talk about the Pacific Gas and Electric request for easements and licenses at Frederick Street Park. As a lot of you know, there's been some gas line replacement and renovation, which has required a lot of trees to be removed, which some people have a really big problem with. Pacific Gas and Electric, you know, PG&E, has a long-standing history of being problematic with not only protecting the environment, but also with the way that they have some of their policies structured, unfortunately. But if you want to know more about that, you can check that out and do a kind of history of the Pacific Gas and Electric in the California world. Also, some talks about liability claims, other resolutions to approve the selection of the annual adjustment factors to be utilized in the calculation of the city's Proposition 4 appropriations limit based on the adopted budget of FY fiscal year 2019. So wordy, right? Lots of things that make it really hard to understand if you're really coming at this, like, what does that even mean? And then if you click on it, on their website, it opens up some of the different resolutions for people to be able to dig through and understand. So you might want to check that out. Something else is the motion carried to direct the mayor to transmit letters to Governor Brown, Senator Modding, Assemblymember Stone, and the League of California Cities to support of AB 0367 and opposing SB 1302. So that's regarding cannabis legislation in the state of California. Also, water treatment facilities, electrical instruments, focusing on HVAC improvements, riverfront parking garage restoration projects, and also purchasing of a refuse truck chassis. So
what does that mean?
They the body or the framework of a refuse truck, so that they can, I would imagine, repair another one that they already have. I can dig more into it later. It says that they tested out the initial hybrid system because against other configurations, the system worked well, right? So the Public Works Department is requesting an emergency purchase of a refuse truck chassis valued at approximately, let's see how much money this will cost, $160,000 approximately from TEC of Oakland, California. So this is, always really great to learn about how much money the city is spending on materials and items. Things cost money, absolutely. So we got to be conscious and acknowledge that. I would wonder what kind of comparison shopping went into this chassis. Another thing that people need to be kind of aware of. There's a lot more things. There's like 40 topics on the agenda, so we're not going to talk with all of them. We're going to jump right now, though, to the tax, which is suggested to go on the November ballot.
The sugar tax you were mentioning? Or
yes, this is they adopted a resolution number NS 29419 to submit to a vote of the electors at the November 6, 2018 general municipal elections a general tax of 1.5 cents per fluid ounce on distributors of sugar-sweetened beverages and the creation of a community oversight panel to transmit an annual report and make recommendations to the city council incorporating the following changes on the ballot, levying 1.5% of sugar-sweetened products for unrestricted general revenue purposes. So that means that the money is going to go into the general fund and can be used for whatever they want.
Wait, so my understanding is that it's the distributors that are getting taxed.
The distributors are being taxed,
Okay.
which will transmit that cost into the consumer, because as soon as the distributors get hit with that tax, they're going to increase the price of their beverages, right? And a lot of the rationale around this tax was to promote community health and wellness and sustain vital community services or vital city services such as parks, beaches, and open spaces, programs for youth, seniors, and working families, and facilities for community activities, and establish a community oversight panel with all funds to be used locally, right? So sounds really great, right? I love the idea of more money for these great programs, which we should be funding anyway. But the question is a sugar tax the right way to go? Coming at it blind, what do you think?
Well, I have very limited understanding of where the budget stands currently, but this is probably something that I would support.
Totally. And on the surface, I would too, right? Where it's like, hey, but then, I started doing some research on taxes and different forms of taxes and what kind of tax this sugary tax one is. And it's what's known as a regressive tax. A lot of people may not know what regressive tax is. So I wanted to pull, instead of my own version of what it is, I went to the IRS website and looked at what they call a regressive tax. And so this is directly from the IRS website. A regressive tax may at first appear to be a fair way of taxing citizens because everyone, regardless of income, pays the same dollar amount. By taking a closer look, it's easy to see that such a tax causes lower income people to pay a large share of their income or a larger share of their income than wealthier people. Though true regressive taxes are not used as income taxes, they are used as taxes on items like tobacco, alcohol, gasoline, jewelry, perfume, and travel. Other fees often are considered regressive because they take a large percentage of income from low-income groups than from high-income groups. These include fees for licensing, parking, and administration to museums and parks, and toll roads, bridges, and tunnels. So, hearing that, regressive taxes don't sound so good. It's this idea, if you're a wealthy person, 1.5 cents tax is not going to be that big of a deal. Just like speeding tickets, right? Like if I'm super wealthy and I can pay off a speeding ticket and it's not going to impact my life at all, then what's going to stop me from speeding, as opposed to someone that has a very limited income and a speeding ticket of $500 could make them homeless, right? So it's this acknowledgement that we're not all coming from the same place economically. And in adding a tax that impacts everyone, it will always disproportionately impact lower income people than more wealthy people.
Yeah, and the way that they framed it, saying that it's for things like parks and community well-being and things like that, it kind of puts it under the guise of, oh, this is going to be good for everybody, this is going to be good for everybody within the community. But then, of course, when you dig deeper into it, and now that you've explained it to me, I have a totally different understanding.
Right. And that's what this radio show is all about, right? That's what this cast is
People
all
like
about.
me.
People like me before I read this regressive tax. I mean, I already knew that it negatively impacted lower income people because, another way to think about it is if you can go on vacations whenever you want, or you can go to the spa for a spa day, you're going to do that. And you're going to, oh yeah, I'm relaxed, I'm good. But if you can't, and you're working 2-3 jobs, you're going to school and working at the same time, and you need to relax, and you want to drink a Monster or go to the store and buy a 6-pack of Sprite or Coke or juice or whatever it is, you're going to be taxed at a higher rate to go and enjoy that, because that's the only thing that's available to you, as opposed to being able to go and enjoy all the other luxuries. So again, with all legislation, everybody, this is why it's important for you to read, right? Read or listen or watch something. Get the information so that you're not just voting arbitrarily for something that sounds good on the surface. Really dig deep into understanding what's going on. Other aspects of this, because when you go to the agenda item and you look at the information, they have public correspondence that you can read from the letters that they received from the community. And there's a very consistent thread of a lack of transparency, accountability, and communication with the entities that this will impact. Specifically, it came from the California Grocers Association and the California Restaurant Association. And from one of their letters, they wrote, quote, "We are shocked at both the lack of transparency and outreach to the business community regarding the city's plan to place a beverage tax on the November ballot. The last public conversation regarding the matter took place in February of 2018. We're disappointed in the deliberately exclusionary process with which the city embarked to move the tax forward. Spirited discussion and debate are an important part of an equitable and democratic society. We encourage you to delay action so that our group and membership can be a part of the discussion." This is very consistent with a lot of people's feelings about city council. They move things forward. They don't take the community into consideration, or if they do, it's poorly advertised. It's scheduled at a time when people can't go there to participate in the discussion. And in the end, they come out with policies that people do not feel represent them at all. I mean, this is another quote from the message from the California Restaurants Association. It's guised as a way to promote healthier eating habits, but in reality is to help deal with the city's budget issues, an issue exacerbated by irresponsible spending and a lack of community participation and consideration. I'm running on a platform of community engagement, inclusive representation, having these different community groups, whether they be representative of restaurants or neighborhoods, to come together, get educated about what's going on, provide them with space where they can educate themselves, where they can empower themselves, and then give them the options of how they can go and make those statements and kind of ideas be heard by our city governments. So many things to talk about. Oh my gosh. Well, we have 2 more things to chat about on the show right now until we move on to the next one. The first is just a quick update. So as you know, the campaign, the Drew Glover City Council campaign, does support rent control in Santa Cruz. I think, when I talk to people at the doors and they kind of get a little uncomfortable when I say that, we open up the conversation because in reality, they don't have an issue with rent control. They have an issue with some of the different aspects that are incorporated in the rent control ballot. The problem with that, though, is that the reason why there's a disconnect or a polarization around this issue is because the city council lost a fantastic opportunity where they could have acted as moderators, bringing people together around the conversation of affordable housing and rent control and working between landlords and renters to find an ordinance that would work well for everyone. Instead, what they did was that they threw their hands up, said, okay, renters, go write your own ordinance, go collect your own signatures. We'll see you back here in November if you can make it happen. Good luck. Not only did they write their own ordinance, but they also went out and collected 10,000 signatures. That's 4,300 more than they needed to hit their 5,700 signature goal. So that speaks to the desire of renters in Santa Cruz and desire rent control. In response to that, though, because of the lost opportunity of collaboration and idea generation and innovative solutions around rent control, because that didn't happen, it has created an anti-rent control movement in Santa Cruz, which is not only dangerous, but will hurt working people, it'll hurt low-income people, it will hurt houseless people, and it will be dangerous for the reactionary rent increases that we may see. There's an article in the Santa Cruz Sentinel that came out very recently, in fact, that talks about the movement. And at one of their recent meetings, they announced that they had already raised $50,000 to fight against rent control.
And that's the anti-rent control campaign raised that much
The
money.
anti-rent control campaign raised...
And what's the organization look like for the renters?
So there's a organization called Movement for Housing Justice, also the Santa Cruz Tenants Association, also the Students United with Renters up on campus at the university. And they're all working in collaboration with each other across different levels of involvement and engagement to continue moving forward, educating the community about the serious need for rent control and the detrimental impact that it'll have if for some reason it is not to pass in November. It's important to get people the information so that they're not confused by some of the misinformation that's being spread. The thing, though, here is not only that they've already raised $50,000, but that they say that they will work to raise between $150,000 and $200,000 to run a robust campaign. That is ridiculous. They're asking landlords and property owners to donate $400 per unit to the campaign so that they can help to fight against protections for renters.
Yeah, it's already such an unfair battle. Do you think renters are going to be able to spot that kind of money?
Yeah, and so this is where it comes down exactly with the campaign, right? It's the same thing with the Drew Glover City Council campaign as it is with the rent control campaign. It will require people who understand the issue and believe in the change to go out and intentionally get involved with the campaign, contact Movement for Housing Justice and get involved, contact the Santa Cruz Tenants Association, contact Students United with Renters, and figure out ways that you can participate in what's going on. And this is where we kind of get into the idea of progressive politics or the word progressive, right? Because that term has been hijacked in Santa Cruz, especially with regards to our political candidates. People say that they're progressive, and then they want to introduce policies that are not progressive. I'm not going to name names, but in the article, there is an individual represented who ran for city council in 2016 on the message of progressive Bernie-esque style politics, but is now serving on the planning commission. He works for the business council, and he is the campaign consultant and coordinator for the anti-rent control campaign. So it's super important that everyone understand not only the realities of rent control, not only that people may say one thing but do another. You got to look at their affiliations, and also just this need for understanding not just about rent control, but also about Costa Hawkins. And so we're going to talk about that next.
And it's one of them. It's super important because it's one of the most immediate, because whatever comes out of that vote, or if that passes or not, you're going to see the changes and the effects immediately, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that leads us into our next topic. This last weekend, which I believe was the 14th, Saturday the 14th of July, Madison, Sally, another one of our campaign leads, and myself went up to the California State Democratic Convention in Oakland, which was an amazing experience, really great opportunity to meet a whole bunch of influential people in my life, specifically a lot of the sheroes in my life. I got a chance to meet and take a picture with Senator Maxine Waters. The woman is doing things, making things happen. Delane Easton, got a chance to meet and talk with her for a little bit, snap a picture, talk about ways that we can coordinate. And most notably, Kimberly Ellis, just a powerhouse in everything that she does, an agitator, someone that is an advocate for progressive politics and just push to make that change happen. Not only that, she's worked to inspire young female leaders through the Emerge program. When I was out there, I got a chance to meet some different graduates of the Emerge program, and they were just so powerful in their own right. If you know Gertrude Smith, who ran for mayor in Seaside, they were there also, engaging in conversation. Also, something that's notable is that Kevin De Leon won the endorsement of the California State Democratic Party, 65% of the endorsement votes, which is huge. If you don't know about Kevin De Leon, go check out his campaign. He represents what we're trying to achieve here in California.
And just the uproar inside of the building when that was announced. There were so many Kevin De Leon volunteers there with lots of signs, a couple of Dianne Feinstein. Dianne Feinstein was there, actually. We saw her momentarily. And a lot of people were incredibly excited that Kevin De Leon won the endorsement, understandably so.
From the Sacramento Bee, they wrote, "For the first time in 25 years, there's an energy and excitement amongst the party's grassroots to elect someone who will represent the values of California in the United States Senate. And there are voters who look to the Democratic Party of California for guidance before they vote." That's from Jonathan Underlin, a spokesman for Kevin De Leon. Other things that happened while we were there, we got a chance to go and caucus with the California Young Democrats, which was a great experience. The conversations were amazing. And the first caucus we went to was the Progressive Caucus. Now, this was all about Prop 10. And if you don't know about Prop 10, learn about Prop 10 because it is the repeal of Costa-Hawkins. For those of you that don't know, Costa-Hawkins makes it so that if a building was built after 1995, it is not eligible for rent control, which takes out a huge chunk of the housing market available for people to be able to feel secure in their housing. This impacts low-income people. This impacts people of color especially. But there was a panel of women there that were just unbelievable in the way that they addressed some of the questions. So we have a short clip here we're going to play of that caucus talking about the Costa-Hawkins repeal, why it's so important, and also bringing in the conversation of race and capitalism. So just a great clip. So check this out.
I think it really has to do with the fact that every single person in the state is affected by the housing crisis. Tenants are affected because they can't find places to live. Homeowners are affected because their kids have come home to live with them, so the empty nest syndrome is going away. I know so many people that live at home. When I do jury selection, 3 years ago, jurors were either tenants or homeowners. Now a majority of my jurors, and this is just like random population, the majority of jurors are living at home or a homeowner that has a kid living at home. So the housing crisis is affecting everyone. And tenants are being mobilized by it. Tenants were mobilized in the late 70s by a housing crisis that was just like this, maybe not as bad, that then led to a huge homeless crisis in the early 80s. We're in exactly the same place. If you, between the founding place of Los Angeles at Olvera Street and the church at Olvera Street and the courthouse, this is not Skid Row, right? There is a tent city lining the streets between the founding place of the city and the Hall of Injustice. Why? Because people have no place to go. And if you talk to the people in those tents, they are not chronically homeless. They are people who were housed a month ago, 2 months ago, had some economic downturn, or their landlord raised the rent and they couldn't afford it and they didn't find us. The Eviction Defense Network has declared a no displacement city. Any tenant that walks in gets representation. Any tenant that walks in the door, we fight the case to the nth degree, to the last possible moment in a movement of resistance, working with the LA Tenants Union and DSA to do outreach and education. Because frankly, the people say you're just trying to clog up the court system. The answer to that is we're not trying to clog it up, but we are going to clog it up, because if 45,000 evictions are happening and every tenant, actually that's down from 73,000 in 2008. When you increase representation, the number of evictions goes down and the number of self-help evictions, illegal evictions, goes up. That's another thing you all need to deal with in San Francisco. But the bottom line is that as a system with 33 trial judges is unable to process, that forces landlords to negotiate with us to let people stay with reasonable rent increases and longer term leases until we can get Costa-Hawkins repealed and LA rent control upgraded. So those are among the things that you need to do in order to make sure. So the answer to your question is, the reason there's a movement in our favor is because tenants are backed up against the wall, and so are their parents and their friends, and so there's not anybody. Does somebody in this room know somebody that's not having an issue? You know, people are having issues, and that is really why, I think. And about the NAACP, I won't venture to guess.
That's too many cameras. We can have a conversation. we can have more specific conversations. There we go.
I mean, I think sometimes we get confused about race and capitalism. So just because you are black or brown does not mean that you are not susceptible to the evils of capitalism. It does not mean that you don't still buy into the lie that capitalism will one day work for everybody in this country. And so I'm not just calling out the NAACP, I'm calling out all of these organizations that are that are led by people of color that are not willing to do the deep dive, hard, unmask the lie work of the economic system in this country that is screwing over all of us. So I'm not a member of the NAACP, so I can't for sure say why they didn't, but I will say that I have yet to hear them take a strong stance against capitalism and its impact on black and brown people in this country. And that's the same for a lot of other people of color-led organizations that hold way too much power in our lives.
So that was just, that last part was because it was announced earlier in the meeting that the NAACP had come out against Prop 10 and was not in support of the repeal of Costa-Hawkins. And so people were asking why that was. And while there was no representatives there to be able to explain, that was what I thought was a fantastic representation. And it reminded me of a saying that I was taught at a nonviolence gathering that I was at, that skin folk aren't always kinfolk, right? And it's this idea that just because someone looks like you does not mean that they automatically have the same interests or desires for change that you do. And so it's important for us to understand where everyone's coming from, help them understand our point of view, and then move forward together into hopefully a more representative future. That was during the day. We also went to a bunch of other great caucuses, which were wonderful, met a lot of other great people, got a chance to participate.
Lots of young, very passionate, progressive people. It was really, really incredible environment to be in.
Energizing, that's for sure, especially to come back to Santa Cruz and really want to drive this political movement home. But after that evening, there was a special launch party hosted by Kimberly Ellis, which when I found out about it, I didn't waste any time. I just got the $27 ticket and planned to go. It was amazing. It was held at a wonderful gallery space filled with revolutionary photography of struggle and of resistance. And there were, not only was there a huge crowd there, and people were, but
and an incredibly diverse crowd at that.
Incredibly diverse. That was one. I'm so glad you mentioned that. There were people from every walk of life there,
all ages, all backgrounds. It was LGBT representation. It was an incredible environment to be in. Everybody was so nice and open to talk about anything. all like-minded people. It was a really, really great environment that she created.
And that's the kind of political world we are working to achieve, right? Where we can all talk together and still be friends, even if there are things that we disagree on, unless they're directly affecting our safety and livelihood. But not only was Kimberly there and gave an amazing speech, but also had just a roster of
incredible women. I was starstruck most of that evening.
Seriously, the caliber of the speakers that were there were unbelievable. Speakers included Senator Holly J. Mitchell. If you don't know who she is, you're going to know who she is in just a second. And Senator Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii. Unbelievable. Both just inspirational. Got the crowd up cheering. But the messages that they were transmitting were amazing. For those of you that don't know about Kimberly Ellis, though, just really quick, she ran for the California State Democratic Party chair position against Eric Ballman and came within something like 60 votes from winning. It was an incredibly contentious race and set the wheels in motion for the progressive movement of the California Democratic Party, especially because it was a clear and open message that we are ready for some change. She is one of my personal sheroes. So I'm going to play a clip from the speech given by Senator Holly Mitchell that is something that I really think is indicative or representative of the movement that we're trying to accomplish here in Santa Cruz and the need for everyone to get involved as much as they can, because there's no longer the ability to separate the personal from the political. Here we go.
Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Mary J. Blige, and some others. And the moderator asked Queen Latifah who she turns to help her navigate. Who is her rudder? And they were focused on her professional career. And she started to cry. Actually, she started to weep. And everybody paused. And she apologized, as we girls do when we cry, as if we owe anybody an apology when we cry. But that's what we do. And she explained that she recently lost her mother. And she talked about the role her mother played in her life personally. And what struck me about that wasn't the question posed to her. The question posed was, who helps you keep straight and narrow and on top of your professional game? And it hit me that they're linked. We don't separate ourselves from our personal lives or our professional life. We're all one. That's right. So watching that moment, that very deeply personal moment, coupled with that travesty of democracy, it occurred to me that we don't have an option to not be engaged and involved. We don't. We have to personalize this work. And the fact that you are here, you get that. But you all need to help other people understand who, when you talk to them about voting and being engaged civically, and they're like, well, that's not me, that has nothing to do with me, I don't vote, whatever. We don't have an option. Our very lives depend on it. Yes! And if you think I'm exaggerating, and if you think I'm a lie, watch the hearings from yesterday. We don't have an option. So you don't get to separate your personal from the world. So when people say to me, how is it that the LA Times referred to you that way, and we see you and you're tough and you're this and you're that, or we hold up Congresswoman Waters on this pedestal. That's not about that. It's about we have to stand beside her. Not admire her from afar. It's about proximity and stand alongside her about advocating on behalf of the kind of country we want to live in, raise our children in, and grow old in. It's as if our very lives depended on it.
Just bringing back the memories of the day. So, yes, that message, if nothing else that you take from this podcast today, is we don't have an option. It's important that we get that message out to each individual person that it's really easy to say, hey, that doesn't matter to me, or hey, that doesn't impact me. When people show up to vote, progressives win every time. But we have to have people coming out and voting and participating in the process, but not just voting. It's getting involved and, like she said, personalizing the work. It's realizing that the campaign will directly impact your life. It's not about just supporting, right? Because I love everyone that supports the campaign. They are amazing. So many people come up to me on a daily basis and ask me, hey, how's the campaign going? And it builds my heart, right? It's like, wow, thank you so much for the support. What's needed is the step beyond that, is the step of figuring out a way, even if it's having conversations with your friends, of ways that you can help to push the movement forward. Push the movement forward. And all of that while being unbought and unbossed. It actually comes from to honor Shirley Chisholm. Now, if you don't know who Shirley Chisholm is, you're going to learn in just a second, but I would encourage you to do your own research, check out this amazing revolutionary woman. She was the first African-American woman elected to Congress. She sought the Democratic nomination in 1972 as the first black woman to run for president. In an article actually recently posted by the Washington Post, actually it was back in January, the article was titled Unbought and Unbossed. Shirley Chisholm's feminist mantra is still relevant 50 years later. And in the article they wrote, quote, Chisholm had the audacity and the political talent to run for a newly drawn New York congressional seat in 1968 without the backing of the Brooklyn Democratic Party bosses. She described herself as, quote, the people's politician, end quote, fighting for higher wages for working people and more money for public education and demanding respect for Black Americans and women. When she got to the Capitol Hill, she challenged institutional customs, pushing her way into spaces that had been previously reserved for white men, making friends and enemies on both sides of the aisle by following her own political playbook. And I want to thank Shirley Chisholm for her leadership and her pathfinding in this role of people of color in elected positions, in challenging the system, and in providing the inspiration and the framework for Kimberly to keep the movement moving forward in making this statement that we as politicians refuse to be bought and refuse to be bossed, working on our own moral compass towards what we know is right. So, this was amazing, right? The first session of Pod for the People, your podcast of everything politics in Santa Cruz. My name's Drew Glover, joined by the one and only Madison Rosh from the Drew Glover for City Council campaign. I'm running for City Council this November in the Santa Cruz City Council elections. This show ran a little bit longer than the other ones are going to run because we wanted to make sure you had a solid background.
Taste of everything.
A taste of everything, exactly. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, the strategy, some of the things we did this weekend, things you should be paying attention to and on your mind as the City Council comes back for its next meeting, I believe, in August. I got to check when that next one comes back, but we'll update you next week about when the next City Council meeting is going to be. We'll have a guest next week you don't want to miss. It's going to be a great conversation, diving on a whole bunch of different ideas, philosophies, ideologies, moralities, all of those great kinds of things. And if you want to get involved with the campaign, you can always go to our website, which is www.drewglover4citycouncil.com, and that's 4FOR, not the number. You can also check us out on Facebook. If you search Drew Glover for City Council, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. You can find us anywhere you need to, but the key is you gotta look. So come and join the movement, be a part of the political revolution in Santa Cruz.
And let us know what you think.
Let us know what you think, because we're always gonna make this show better. See you later.